Thanks for joining us on episode 1523 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. Today is a special episode where I interview Kathleen Day. Kathleen and I both serve as board members with the Alora Community, a community used to support neurodivergent individuals and their caregivers. And we talk a little bit about the community and what we do. This is a special episode as part of the Podcastathon, which is a bunch of podcasts all supporting their favorite nonprofits. And this is mine.
Beyond that, at some point, mom and dad become elderly themselves and can't always be there forever. Once that phase of their adult life comes in, having a space like this that promotes, like you said, that community, that true sense of community and belonging.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world. In this podcast episode, I interview Kat Day. I asked Kat about Alora, the nonprofit that we both serve. Kat shares why she's so passionate about the Alora community, and Kat also shares why Alora is so able to serve the wider community of neurodivergent individuals. Alora is a nonprofit holistic community dedicated to supporting neurodivergent individuals and their caregivers. I have a great book that's been out for a while now called Inspired Living. Assemble the puzzle of your calling by mastering your time, your talent, and your treasures. You can find out more about that book over at inspiredlivingbook.com. It'll take you to a page where there's information and you can sign up to get some mailings about it as well as purchase a copy there. I'd love to see you get a copy and share with me how it impacted your world. Founded by Yvette Bonilla-Leach, this community integrates mindfulness and holistic wellness practices to provide compassionate, soul-centered guidance. Alora focuses on creating an inclusive, nurturing space where self-care, balance, and being are prioritized, helping those in their community cultivate meaningful, aligned lives. Alora is committed to shifting mindsets, deepening connections, and elevating the well-being of both caregivers and their loved ones. Today I have on Kat, who serves both on the board along with me for this wonderful community. Hey, Kat, why don't you talk a little bit about back in the day? So you actually got involved with Alora before I did and were part of the early movements. And of course, it's evolved and changed over time. But what was some of what actually attracted you to being part of this organization, part of this community at the beginning?
It's good that you talked about like the history of the grassroots aspect of it. And so Yvette and I have been friends for a long time. And the biggest commonality between us is that we both have neurodivergent sons. We're ourselves neurodivergent, but our sons are both on the autism spectrum, lower verbal. Mine has a cognitive disability as well. So we shared that in common as caregivers, but also from that firsthand standpoint. That commonality made her feel really comfortable in pitching the whole idea to me early on. I guess she had already had enough forethought about it to lay down notes and plans and outlines. But she took me to Olive Garden one day, and this was in 2019.
All great ideas happen in Olive Garden, right?
Yeah, all the great ideas always, right? And she's like, I have this thing, this idea that I need to pitch to you. And I'm like, okay, I'm down, whatever it is. And as we sit there, she proceeds to tell me her idea for this amazing, almost utopian sort of living community and thriving community for neurodivergent individuals that is done and erected in a mindful way, but also in a way that maintains their dignity
Hmm.
and honors the different aspects of their lives as adults as well. And I just thought it was just really unique in the way that she was explaining it to me really did sound completely different than the group homes and the things that are available to the neurodivergent population currently and that
Hmm.
I've ever seen before or heard of before. And so the models that she was looking at when she was putting her idea together, they really did, according to Yvette, they really fell short of what she was envisioning. And one of the biggest aspects about this is that she wanted to make it so that there were thriving garden spaces and animals on hand, like whether it be chickens, goats, and basically so the animal therapy as well, and
Hmm.
the just the quiet caregiving of those animals and that therapy that can naturally take place within that, the compassion, the soothing aspect of having the nature around the individuals
Hmm.
and being able to share in the stewardship of that and knowing that those flowers that are growing, that they themselves helped to grow those
Yeah.
flowers and what have you.
Well, and it helps give back dignity and responsibility to them too, that it's not just like you're here. The folks that are members of the community are there to be members of the community. They're not there to be, quote, taken care of.
Of
They're
course.
part of it.
Exactly. And then she went on to even explain wanting to have music studios, music rooms full of instruments that could just be played and people be able to sign in, sign out, take turns so as not to disturb one another, or come in small groups, those who would like to. Art classes where, even things as extensive as pottery and things like that, the finer arts could be done, things that would basically give them a sense of wholeness and fullness of life. And so she obviously had me with all of that right away, thinking of, okay, what is the future going to look like for our sons? Say if they themselves wanted their own space and they didn't want to have to live with mom and dad forever. And even beyond that, at some point, mom and dad become elderly themselves and can't always be there forever. So once that phase of their adult life comes in, having a space like this that promotes, like you said, that community, that true sense of community and belonging in a way that it's different from a group home. That is something that I was immediately on board for. And I fell in love with that vision. And I thought this is something that I can't believe we're here in the 2000s and it still doesn't exist just yet to this capacity that you're explaining to me. And so I
Mhm.
was all in right away.
When you think about it, talk a little bit with me about your, so separate from Alora, the kind of rest of your life, some of the work you do, and how do you think that there's a connection between some of the work you do and what Alora's outlook and dream is?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I am an intuitive life coach. I have been in the mental health industry since 2014, and that's when I started taking on clients professionally and being being on the spectrum myself, and then of course having my son and vicariously meeting so many other people on the spectrum, whether it be Asperger's or ADD, ADHD, autism, what have you. It definitely gave me more of an insight and an insight experience to what it is to be neurodivergent. And I found that I don't know if it's by happenstance, but definitely, I would say about 60% of my clients have been on the spectrum in one way or another. And every single one of them have always told me how much easier it has been to communicate with me specifically as a coach than it has been with other mentors that they had spoken with or even other therapists and things like that. I really felt, okay, this is part of the calling for me. That, and of course, caregivers. Yvette is amazing when it comes to working with caregivers and takes her psychology and is able to aid them in that way. And me, I came to all of that a little later. I felt perhaps even though I myself am a caregiver, it was a little bit more difficult for me to acquiesce to what different elements of their lives that differ from my own could I have insight to. And I felt that way until I just by happenstance happened to come across a couple of caregivers within my coaching that gravitated toward me, and then realized that essentially the same practices and things that I use with trauma survivors and those who suffer PTSD or different forms of grief, like it's all things that are absolutely applicable to those caregivers' experiences. So that really did translate, and it's something that I'm glad I've been able to cultivate within my practice. And I feel as though that part of my career stuff is definitely just 100% in line with what Alora does and what it exists to do, hopefully more so in the future as we grow and progress. And then I do a lot of public speaking as well. I've done even down to going to high schools, right, for career day and what have you. So being able to talk to the youth about different elements of career stuff and what to expect in this field. I've also been able to do public speaking for a group of officers about sensitivity when it comes to neurodivergent individuals. And that was particularly amazing. The officers that were present, they had a lot of really great questions. And in that experience, I realized how much room there is for reformation within our, what would you call it? So our servicemen and women, the way that they interact with the neurodiverse
The first
population.
responders. Hmm.
And one of the biggest things that I was told there is it's not that we're insensitive, it's that if there are no visual markers
Yep.
of the individual being on the spectrum or being differently abled, then our first instinct is treat it like they're being resistant.
Hmm.
And so, how do we get around that when, quote unquote, they look like everyone else?
Right.
And this is a fair question. And it's not something to be taken offense of, oh, you're doing that thing of you don't look autistic thing. It's not the same. Yes, that is what they're saying, but what they're saying is from a safety standpoint. And so that also to me just was very parallel to what Alora started to develop later with the law enforcement sensitivity training and training them to properly interact with and anticipate the needs of special needs individuals. So I actually am particularly grateful for that aspect as well.
Hmm. And I think it's important to recognize that, first off, that neurodivergent is a spectrum, as you said, and can cover that little word it covers a lot of ground in terms of what it can cover. And it is hard as an officer or first responder or someone like that to possibly know all possible things that are out there. That's tough. And we recognize that idea. And it's not oh, you're a bad person, Mr. or Mrs. Policeman. It's what can we do to learn and to become aware and to become more receptive and more open to the fact that maybe it's not just that they're resistant. They may have something else that's going on. And what could we do to de-escalate instead of escalate the situation?
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
feel as though this is also when you get into the philosophical aspect of it, there's also a lot more that could be being done by on a state and federal level with providing extra item identifications. I know that they have some, but I feel as though that could be far better, not
Mhm.
just enforced. I don't know that enforce is the word, but that
Uniform.
provided, better
Hmm.
provided so that individuals who are with higher support needs, if they're still able to get around the world a little bit on their own as well, just to be able to have some sort of identification on their person more visible, but without, of course, making them feel othered. So it's
There
catch
aren't any
20.
easy answers. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
there really aren't. But I love the fact that Alora specifically has taken on that kind of initiative to support or act as a support in the interim that we're all still learning and still attempting to try and to be better, right?
And again, I think too that my goddaughter is on the spectrum and also has a developmental delay. And seeing her and interacting with her, that's one person with one set of criteria. And then when I met Yvette's son and others, you begin to recognize, oh, wait a minute, this is a lot more complex than just one person or one set of little check boxes or anything. Because at the end of the day, it's really about people, and it's about caring for people and for the fact that we're not all exactly the same, and that's not a bad thing.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. In fact, unexpectedly, I started taking on a caregiving position. So 5 days a week, right after my son gets out of school, he brings home one of his classmates with him. And so I'm caregiving for him in the evenings whilst his grandmother is at work and everything. And he's a year older than my son, and his special needs are similar in so many ways, but also different in
Different.
some ways. And it's an interesting thing also to have a regular exposure to what those differences are. And I think that having him around also enriches me rewiring the ways that I interact, and that then trickles into my coaching as well, so that I'm even better prepared than I already was when it comes to dealing with special needs individuals who have those higher special needs or that higher needs requirements. So it's been a beautiful thing so far. I'm really loving it. And I plan on continuing to do that sort of caregiving off and on probably most of my life, just because of what it does for my mindset, but also for how it benefits my son as well. And
Mhm.
seeing him interact
Right.
directly with who is now his best friend as a result of all of this, it also makes me realize that these types of communal settings where it's great because they are able to parallel play and parallel learn, parallel self-soothe and stuff, but they just like to be around each other. But also when it's time for him to go home, it's okay, buddy, see you later. And like, my son very much enjoys his personal time too.
Mhm.
And so thinking in regards to what is that going to translate like when they have their own module being that's right next to each other, but they don't have to be right in each other's space all the time kind of thing, and having that individuality while also wanting and needing that interaction too when they're feeling like it. It's seeing that model unfold even
Mhm.
as we're all still going through the groundwork of what that will be.
Mhm. When you think about some of the work that Alora is doing and aiming towards building that community space and those sorts of things, what are some of the things that you think are the most important, from your point of view, most important things that we continue to focus on?
That's man, that's a mixed bag. And I say that because I know that one of the biggest things that Yvette had to do during, gosh, and I'm trying to think around what time it was that the shift occurred, but a couple of years into Alora, it went from the farming situation and the gardening situation to, because of the reception being much better with the mindful community events, let's go ahead and shift focus to that and those experiences and cultivating that within the community. Um, and I think I really love how she pivoted with that, because that was her way and the way, at least that we found so far, to serve the community with boots on the ground, meeting them where they are
Mhm.
instead of having to facilitate one place that they'd always have to come out to us, which can be difficult for people. So going inner city to parks and to places and spaces where the bigger part of the population is that would need this, and making it just basically taking that wellness fair to them, or like the Secret Santa things that she does is part of every year, just taking it straight to the community like that in the immediate now. instead of waiting until this perfect utopian thing is built, she's not content with waiting. I love that let's do what we can now, where we can now. So I think that it's going to be super imperative for us to meet people where they are. I love that she's doing that. In the same respect, the educational platforms that she's putting together for the working with the Open Futures Learning, as well as with the Dignity Project, and of course the training for the law enforcement and servicemen and women and individuals, if you will, service individuals. I think those initiatives are going to be more imperative in the now than it will be to focus on erecting an immediate community. I think that first priming and making sure that businesses and that institutions are not only aware of the different needs and the different nuances they may encounter, but also that they have a healthy view and a healthy understanding and respect for the dignity of neurodivergent individuals. I think that is so important as an integral part of what's needed before she starts to put that foundation in for the communities itself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you think about folks that are hearing this, that are out there that might want to support Alora and the mission in some way, and here I'm talking more than just donating money, though obviously that is always welcome. What are some of the ways that you've seen other organizations or other individuals support the mission of Alora?
Sponsoring, I would definitely say sponsorship is such an important part of all of this. And by that, like you said, it transcends beyond a monetary exchange. If you are a venue owner who has a space that can facilitate for wellness classes or art therapies, or for a speaker to come and sit and speak to caregivers to give them extra resources. So definitely, so facilitators, right? Facilitation is always so needed. Sponsoring in that way, particularly, or businesses, whether they be large corporations like HEB or even down to family owned businesses and entrepreneurs, basically anyone who has items that they feel as though they could donate toward what we're doing. Say, for example, if someone locally owns a print shop and was like, I really love what Alora's doing, but I can't facilitate to pay money to donate or anything. However, for your next event, if you guys needed 300 brochures or something, I'll sponsor the 300 brochures if you'll just get me the graphic and the things that you need printed. And so that alone, that is a sponsorship of an in-kind good. And those things, the beautiful thing about it as an incentive is that it is something that is tax deductible. It's something that you absolutely can get your tax deductible receipts from Alora to later present, and so that it's not something that goes unnoticed for you, for your efforts and for your materials that you're spending into helping. Mm-hmm. The other part of it is that with those partnerships, we are more than happy to, of course, add those businesses' names and or the individuals, if it's individual families, whoever, adding those names onto the media kits and material that we're putting out there so that people are aware that this company is giving back and that they are doing their best to help the community in some beautiful way. So there's absolutely just so many ways to go with all of that. And get creative. I would say just think outside of the box, surprise us. If you've got something that you're like, I don't know if they'll go for this, just ask. That's all I can say. And I don't care if it's email or DMing, just reach out because it's something that is consistently needed and always welcome.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I'll add to that too is if you're in a situation where you have an audience, and by that, either folks that are neurodivergent or caregivers or folks that are connected to that community in some way and need folks to come in to do things or to support in some way, I would also say connect with us in that way too, because again, through things like the Dignity Project and others, we have access to some resources that can help organizations that maybe don't don't have access to those resources, but actually have the need. So we can facilitate connections that way as well. So in other words, I guess it can be a two-way street too. Sometimes folks need support and don't know where to go for the support. And if we don't know, or we're not the appropriate organization, we'll try to help find who they are as well.
Right. And so there is a resource page too that you'll find on the Alora website where so the actual board members ourselves, we do provide certain services for clients, or I don't know if clients is the appropriate word, but for participants within the Alora program, right? Whether that be the caregivers or the neurodivergent individuals themselves. But we do offer special services, whether it be either pro bono or at very discounted rates, to make it accessible to our community's most vulnerable demographic. So if you yourself are in that kind of need, or you know someone who's in that kind of need, absolutely refer them, have them check out what our offerings are. If you're there and you don't see a specific offering that's in line with what you're looking for or needing, again, just DM or email us and we will do everything in our power to point you in the correct direction, or even make those connections for you and get you started.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you or that you feel is important to share about Alora?
The mission itself. I can touch on, so from a philosophical standpoint, this is obviously something that has been incredibly personal and sentimental coming from Yvette's heart and soul. The entire endeavor is a reflection of who she is as a person from the inside, and also the world that she creates for herself and her family on the outside. And so this is something that is coming from a mother's love, right? It's very interwoven into everything that Alora is. You'll find something incredibly nurturing, compassionate, but also very strong and independent. Much like our founder, it has that sense of independent and walking with confidence and dignity and holding space for others also to be completely themselves and completely at home in their own skin and in the spaces that we cultivate for ourselves and for them. It's very much in line with that come as you are philosophy. And another part of it is just Yvette has this intrinsic belief that every single person has something of value to lend to the conversation, something of value to bring to the table, something that is inherently part of their self and their person or their talents that can enrich the environment that they're sharing. And so that shared value of just being who you are and leaning into your authenticity and bringing that is so very much at the core of what and who Alora is. It's its own animal, and I have seen it evolve and grow, and it's taken on its own identity. And I would think that those particular traits and those aspects are absolutely part of that identity that is Alora.
Absolutely. You can find out more about Alora Community over at aloracommunity.org. Of course, I'll have a link to that in the show notes. If you heard more about our mission and would like to give us some support, there's a donate link there as well over at aloracommunity.org. Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you enjoyed this episode, please do us a favor. Go over to inspiredstewardship.com/iTunes rate, all one word, iTunes rate. It'll take you through how to leave a rating and review and how to make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you can get every episode as it comes out in your feed. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures develop your influence, and impact the world.